Everyone, welcome back to the Mind of Marie. Today we are exploring the lines that define us and the walls that cage us with Cece Robinson, the brilliant mind behind Divided. Cece, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sai. It's great to be here.
So, Divided is such a punchy, evocative title. Without giving too much away, what was the initial spark that led you to this specific story and the separation your characters face?
So, I actually had a dream in 2012 when Obama was president, and we thought that maybe we were in a post racial US. Spoiler alert, we weren't. But my dream, where I saw a civil war that we fought over racial issues, and I was in the dream, and it was very upsetting, obviously. I woke up crying and praying and somehow made it back to sleep. And when I went back into the dream, I saw that a dictator had taken over and separated everyone according to their ethnic groups and put up walls between them. And 2 generations later, children, kids, teenagers were growing up, never having met someone from another ethnicity. And at that point, that's when I met my main characters.
Wow. So, in a narrative where the world itself is the enemy, pacing is everything, how did you decide when to give the reader a piece of the puzzle and when to withhold it to keep that tension high?
So, in my books, at least, the idea I have is to keep the tension running relatively high throughout the narrative. And instead of using like pieces of a puzzle, like maybe you would see in a mystery or so, I use the puzzle pieces to actually ratchet up the tension. They don't provide any kind of relief like you maybe would in a mystery or maybe a romance. How I give the reader breaks in that pacing is to actually use relational elements when the characters are just hanging out, having fun, maybe getting used to each other, getting to know each other, and being teenagers, and allow that to release the tension in between those tense.
So, that kind of leads into my next question. Your protagonist is navigating a world that feels increasingly precarious. How did you approach building their internal world to keep them relatable amidst all the chaos?
So I think, people are people no matter what their circumstances are in. And so when you throw someone into an unfamiliar circumstance, they're still going to react in a way that is somewhat predictable in our current framework, which is why I think people can relate to the characters because they say, oh, what would I do if I were in that? And then they recognize something in the character, a trait or maybe a flaw, maybe it's a strength, as something they've seen in either themselves or maybe someone they know. Take Marcos for his instance. There are girls his age in his native area that are drawn to him, who are giggling about him, and he's completely oblivious to the attention. So even though the world itself is unfamiliar, that dynamic of teenagers is very familiar. And I'm sure we all know that kid that's completely unaware of their physical attractiveness. I know I do. I've watched it happen before. It always makes me laugh.
So, we see a ripple effect in the book where the central conflict leaks into every personal life. How does the state of the world in Divided challenge the trust between your secondary characters?
So I think the world of all the characters is really changing wildly. It's not just the main characters and the secondary. It's people. Obviously the world is completely being upheaved between books 1 and 4, and some characters handle that change better than others. The way I've done it in my series is to make sure that the characters, main characters and secondary characters, are acting consistently with their motivations, their own personal goals, and their underlying character. And this means knowing those things, knowing what they fear, knowing what they dream, knowing what they want, even if they're a secondary character that's not on the page for very long. If I don't know that, then maybe they don't need to be in the narrative, is what I figure.
So it's 2026, and we live in a time of constant digital and social footprints. Did current events?
I would say absolutely. I wrote Divided as a series to speak into the division I see in society. My hope is that I can convince young people, especially, to live life differently than maybe I, as a Gen Xer or other millennials or even the boomers, have lived. I think if we're going to escape the echo chambers, it takes intentionality. The default setting for social media algorithms and a lot of online interactions is to perpetuate those echo chambers. Not through any scheme or ill intention, but just because they reward engagement. So when I'm writing, I am thinking, how can I interrupt those echo chambers that we have set up in our own life? How can I specifically interrupt those echo chambers by causing people to think differently? And if we can think differently, then we'll act differently. I love people who can like get all into the sentence, but my brain works way too fast for that. So I am absolutely more of a cinematic writer. I even block out combat scenes like as if I were a theater director. So I maybe take the cinematic side of the writing a little far so that when revisions, I have to actually go back and work on the prose. But when I'm initially drafting, I'm all in the cinema. I think all throughout Divided, people are wondering who the major antagonist is, not the protagonist. Who's the big villain? Who's the big bad? And by the end of Caged, I think they're surprised to figure out that maybe the one they thought was the big bad isn't as bad or is completely eclipsed by this other big bad. And then there's also a reveal at the end of Cage that I hope sends readers hunting back for the breadcrumbs I left them in Divided and Caged. No spoilers, so I won't say anything, but it is at the end of Caged. So in a series, you're going to, by nature, have loose ends until you get to that last book. If you had a satisfying conclusion at book one, I don't know that you would ever write book 2, 3, or 4, or 5. But in Divided, I would say each of the first 2 books has a satisfying ending. In general, I hate cliffhangers when I'm reading. That being said, book 3, Betrayed, will end on a cliffhanger. But the good thing is that United book 4 is coming out a few months later, so people don't have to stand on the edge of that cliff for very long. And I'm not George R. Martin to delay and delay and delay. So there'll be finish of the series will be out shortly after book 3, so they won't have to hang out long. If you're reading my book and you wonder, I wonder how long she researched this, you should definitely assume I spent at least 2 hours going down rabbit trails and deep diving. Research is one of those things I can definitely get lost in, but I read original firsthand accounts from slaves, accounts from prisoners in North Korean prison camps, in Soviet gulags, in Nazi Germany concentration camps. I read firsthand accounts about from human trafficking victims and those who rescued them. So many weapons and hand-to-hand combat YouTube videos that I think I fight really well, but I probably would be awful. And weapons and physics research, like how do missiles work? You'd be surprised all the rabbit trails I have gone down to research. It is fast paced with a end result of freedom. I want my stories to have a thread of hope through everything where normal people do extraordinary things and there's hope at the end of it all. There's also themes of racial reconciliation and the power of forgiveness and healing that they come up whatever I write, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I'd say my first drafts are always a little bit messy, but those big themes are always baked in from the start. I may move scenes around and cut or add, but the themes of freedom from oppression, collaborating across cultural divides, diversity are always going to be in everything I write. Definitely, I think they get better. The first draft is getting better overall, but it's still a little messy. So that was me. I was lost in the middle of Divided, and I had a friend who told me go to the end. Write what the end is going to be, and that will help you know how to get there. And I think so many times, when we're lost, and even just in life, lost in the city, and we don't know where we're going. What we always do? We put the address in a GPS. We need to know where we're going. But by clearing up the ending, a writer can then work backward. One drafting technique I've used is to write the pivotal story scenes, maybe the inciting incident, the midpoint, the all is lost, moment where everything is dark and it looks like the hero is going to lose, and then the pivot moment at the beginning of the third act and at that end. So I write those big scenes and then I connect the dots in between. I would love to. Some of that depends on reader demand, but others of it is, I would love to write the story between two of my secondary characters. It's an off screen and from the series, but I would love to write their story. Would follow the path of betrayed in that timeline and happening in another location. Would love to write that. And there's also a prequel duology I would love to sink my teeth into, but we'll see. I can understand the desire to write like broadly appealing books, but I would say even, the New York Times bestseller isn't for everyone. In fact, I've personally not finished a few of those that I've started. So I would say write the book that's in your heart to write and you'll later find the audience. I think new writers especially would be surprised at how widely most readers venture. On the other hand, there is something to be said for considering marketing while writing. That works for a certain type of writer, someone who's especially skilled at spotting those marketing trends and then writes fast enough to meet those trends. That's a rare author. I don't even think I'm that author. I don't think I can write that fast to meet a market demand or trend. Most of us just focus on the writing the book that's in our heart and then figure out what kind of reader is going to like that book and then market to that person. Even a niche market in today's world, there are billions of people and a lot of them are readers. Some of them are not. But even a niche market is going to be a lot of readers. And so market to those people. You'll find them.